Night Radio's Callaloo presents Just Another Look. Just Another Look is an innovative, exciting, albeit decidedly provocative, and yes, certainly controversial, socio-political analysis of issues of a local, regional, and international nature. Just Another Look is heard on Night Radio on Saturdays at 6 p.m., repeated on Sundays at 9 p.m. Catch us on the World Wide Web, www.nightradio.info. You can also check us out on Facebook and YouTube. I am, of course, Keith Joseph. Today, dear friends, is Saturday. It is the 12th day of April 2025. Welcome to another edition of your favorite program, Just Another Look. For yet another week, the entire international community has been experiencing serious economic and political trauma as a result of some decisions being made by the President of the United States, Donald Trump, with regard to tariffs and the imposition of tariffs. We would like to believe, some of us at least, that whatever else is happening in the world, we are somehow immune. We are somehow protected. But we have learned from history that the rich nations consistently want to maintain their wealth. Because in a very real sense, wealth is power. And so for us in the Caribbean, we have an understanding that as we look at reclaiming our Garifuna heritage, in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the heritage left by the indigenous peoples in the other Caribbean countries, as we seek to reclaim those heritages, we are reminded of the exploitative approach taken by the then wealthy nations, larger wealthy nations, more advanced technologically, particularly with regard to weaponry. As they moved across the globe and pillaged wherever they wanted, whatever they wanted, in order to maintain their fundamental economic base. Because they knew back then how important their economic well-being was to the wielding of political power. Walter Rodney told us how Europe underdeveloped Africa. We've seen historians from exploited and colonized countries rewrite their history in order to allow successive generations of youth to have a thoroughgoing understanding of of the countries and the people's experiences. So we've always had exploiters and exploited. And in the 70s, when the Caribbean joined the rest of the world, allowing for exploited nations to seek their own development, we were able to clearly say with the rest of the developing world that when those larger, wealthy nations catch the cold or sneeze, we catch the cold. That was to highlight the level of dependence that the wealthy nations, the same ones that traveled across the world exploiting others and identify them as underdeveloped, and whose wealth they stole and used to increase their own wealth and develop their own nations while exploiting and ensuring the underdevelopment of others. And they left us heavily and sadly, bitterly dependent. We have had the international community referred to as developed and underdeveloped. And there was a struggle to get away from the stigma of underdeveloped nations to developing. We are at a stage of developing. We are not underdeveloped. We've been divided into North and South. The North being the wealthy nation and the South being the impoverished ones, developing nations. We have heard of the center and periphery theory, where the center was the metropolitan countries who benefited from the exploitation of those countries that were on the periphery, the poorer nations, the developing nations. So we've had all sorts of characterizations. In the Caribbean, those who colonized us talked about the Antilles, and they talked about the Greater Antilles and the Lesser Antilles. Those terms didn't just happen. They were systematically created and impacted the socialization of our peoples. To know that you are a part of the Lesser Antilles. Yes, Greater and Lesser initially referred to the size of the different islands that constituted the Caribbean. But over time, the process of socialization allowed the respective peoples to see themselves as greater equaling wealthier, greater equaling superiority, lesser inferiority. And to this day, we are still so stigmatized. Successive generations of Caribbean peoples have grown up reflecting that same feeling of superiority and inferiority. A sense of bigness. And so it is not surprising that when you read through the annals of Caribbean history, you have an understanding as to why the Federation, conceptualized initially by people from the smaller islands of the Caribbean, could not last. Because the larger countries consider them so well endowed that they felt that they would be carrying us along. We would be their burden. In fact, Jamaica's referendum essentially said that. Those small islands, the people from the small islands, they have nothing. And as soon as we open up our shores, they'll flood our countries, take our jobs, and eventually they will pull us down to their level. That was the thinking in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And that was the thinking that led to the collapse of the West Indian Federation. But it is important for us to remember that, particularly that concept of not being eager to recognize that we have the capacity to unite ourselves, if only because we had the same history, but also because we are in the same geographical space. There's a sort of almost natural sense that we belong. We are of the same area geographically. And so one got the impression that the latest move by the United States to impose tariffs on so many nations around the world, including one country that only had penguins living in it, imposed a 10% tariff. Don't know who was thinking that the penguins would somehow be valuable enough to themselves to be accorded a 10% tariff. But what that has done, it has broken the reliance that some people had on the quote-unquote security being aligned with the United States. So Europe has literally been vilified by the new administration of the United States and treated with such disdain, such contempt in the recent past, that its members have been driven closer together for their very survival. They have been catapulted together in order to survive as a group of nations. And so, in a sense, that same motivating factor ought to have galvanized us in the Caribbean to being closer together, to understand our failures and the failures of our predecessors, to understand the importance of trying to benefit as a collective from being in the same geographical space, from having the same sort of historical experiences. And for years of being sufficiently close and in interaction with others, that we should have been, at this time, forging closer ties. But what we have is something vastly different, and we'll get to that in the program. When one listened to the words of our Prime Minister in his recent presentation at CELAC, at the CELAC meeting in Honduras, we recognized that there he was singing about the value of Caribbean and Latin America working together. Theoretically, it was a nice sounding document. Theoretically. And we know that he has the gift of gab, so he put it nicely and he brought in the religious thing that he's so fond of doing these days and everything. Utilizing the same sort of strategy that the Europeans have been using to talk about the value of us as a region coming together. But his speech was consistent with some of those that he had made about the Caribbean coming together. And one ought to remember that when he first became Prime Minister and headed to his first meeting of CARICOM heads, he spoke to the media, suggesting that his presence may not have allowed for business as usual within CARICOM, and that his presence would somehow make a difference in terms of what would happen with CARICOM and its impact on the peoples of the Caribbean. 24 years on, he has nothing to show in terms of his impact on CARICOM. It is the same type of humdrum agency that has no real teeth in terms of enforcement of decisions that the collective had made. None. No impact. And he had been talking the same thing that he said at CELAC, of the importance of us working together. Now, one of the problems that we've had is that it is so easy for our Prime Minister to talk about regional unity, real substantive unity among the peoples of the Caribbean, a la CARICOM. And then to do the same, embracing the Latin Americans, a la CELAC. But having a totally different approach to his own St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It would have been good if Vincentians listening to him addressing CELAC recently, in the aftermath of the imposition of Trump's tariffs, to listening to him speaking about CARICOM and the OECS, right? All regional agencies bringing together heads of government of the various countries. and the importance of unity at this juncture, this historical juncture. And retelling over and over and over again of our sordid history. And he who claims to have been beaten on the anvil of history tells a good story about why, as a region, our destiny is intimately interwoven with each other. But the words are all hollow and have little impact for the average Vincentian who understands that much of what he's telling CARICOM and CELAC needs to be told and needs to be made manifest at home. Charity begins at home. If at home your management of the nation is fraught with political tribalism, that you could take the time to sit in the same forum at which one of your leaders of your organization could get up and say, we, meaning the political party's membership, must own the jobs too. It is not enough for us to own the campaign. We must own the jobs, as though nobody else lives in St. Vincent and the Grenadines other than those who wear red. And say nothing. You know that that statement was fraught with divisiveness. So if at home you're facilitating that level of political divisiveness, how dare you suggest to CARICOM and CELAC that they should become beacons of unity working together? We keep reminding people of Douglas Hall's analysis of the failure of federation. He said it was a union. They were planning a union of Caribbean leaders, not a union of Caribbean peoples. That is still what obtains today. The leaders are the ones who dictate the level of unity, solidarity, and integration within this CARICOM. The leaders. They go and they make fanciful phrases that get all the mileage in the media. And their respective peoples at home are pondering, but how is it possible for them to meet time and again and say the same thing about regional unity over and over and over again when they cannot facilitate, or in fact, they do everything to hinder unity at home? If you cannot take criticism from your own people, if you cannot understand that it was okay for you to speak about establishing consultative democracies when you're running for election, and integrity legislation, so that the people will believe that you have some sense of integrity and you want to make sure that your governmental system reflects that integrity. So you want to put in place integrity legislation. All nice sounding things, such as together now instead of labor now. All nice sounding phrases. But when you swivel in the big chair, those things like they fly out of the top of your head. They can't find them way on your legislative agenda. It is not possible for you to realize regional unity, Caribbean unity, even within the OECS, to say nothing about CELAC, when at home you are not a bastion promoting unity of a country. You can't destroy a country with political divisiveness and then think you will fit it back together like Humpty Dumpty. You either engaging in political gimmickry, political mamagism, or that's the way you are. Nakedly partisan, nakedly politically prejudicial, nakedly holding on to a mode of operation that exudes divisiveness. You cannot unite a country if you are declaring openly that we take care of our own. If you want to get anywhere, join us, because we rule. Or that we are witnessing an attempt to establish some sort of familial dynasty in control of the governance of this country. And so we have a situation where the leadership brokers no real criticism. And if you're not accepting criticism from outside, we know for sure you're not accepting it inside. Because the style of leadership allows you to hand out books to your contesting candidates and declare to the public they have to read. But you're asking them to read your books, which you have difficulty getting sold anywhere. Where you can't point to which universities have ever taken any of them to include in the bibliographical readings for any of their courses, even within our region. But you have to tell us, sometimes when you're making your speeches, and I have written about this, and you have to tell us how many books you have written, as though the sheer writing of books exudes academia and intelligence. So we get your nice sounding phrases, sir, in your presentations at all these different fora. But they seem to contradict everything that you are doing at home. So when people challenge you by simply asking, what are the plans for the international airport, when you conceptualize it? What would it cost, etc., etc.? And they get a song and a dance. And they tell us that it is being built by a coalition of the willing. We can't get, even years after its existence and operation, how much did each of the members of that coalition contribute to the airport? It's a secret. It is a secret. An international airport built the nation's resources for the benefit of the nation, and the nation cannot have the benefit of the true cost of the institution. How are people supposed to respect you? How are people supposed to talk about integrity when matters of state, like the cost of building our airport, remains a secret? So you're talking to CELAC about this historical moment which confronts us, with the United States changing the dynamics of international trade, and of the importance of us getting together. But you're getting together as leaders. You're not carrying our people with you, because our people don't know what it means to have you as its prime minister facilitating national unity and national solidarity. Because some of us have been referred to by you as being of the lowest common denominator, of being dishonest and malignant, of being minority wrong. Of not being easily recognized by George Bush if he came while we were all together in the middle of the night. He recognized some, but not others. As if we don't understand the analogy. When we attempt to suggest that our politics and decision making at election time has to do with who is Jesus like and who is Barabbas like, because we want to continue to utilize religion as an integral component of our political culture, and have an understanding of that analogy that you made between Jesus and Barabbas. And you do that on a political platform. So how are we supposed to be united? And so now your weekly columns, as election draws near, are intent on trying to give the nation the impression that somehow your governance for the last 24 years reflected some sense of national unity. No, it hasn't. It has been a benevolent dictatorship of sorts, of a leader standing tall, perhaps on the shoulders, backs, and even heads of the rest of the nation, dictating what is to be, so that it becomes your little fiefdom. And that what you say goes, so that you decide but you recognize the challenges that you have. You're now looking for people, and you're looking to put more women as candidates because you recognize your own failures over the years to accord women their place in Vincentian society. And so the challenge you have is that you're unable to explain why it is, as the old people say, all of one upon a sudden, Rene Batiste was marginalized within government and within the party. Was she not a good leader and example for women in politics. But now you're trying to reinvent the wheel because you've lost everything else. The people who were once young when they were brought into the political framework of your party are now old. And they have nothing to show for it because over the 24 years, the persons you have put into the position of deputy prime minister are persons whom you believe are so weak or appear to believe are most likely to hold the fort as you would have them do. The younger ones might take a chance and do something innovative and creative or something they think about. Why have the others not been given the opportunity? Young people that you say are supposed to be few. How long was Saboto supposed to wait? How long? Languishing. And we said on this program that he will never be forgiven for the fact that while you're walking into your own convention, people are there with placards and shouting Saboto, 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 when you decided that you'll change your mind and run again. Because at that time, many Vincentians thought that the game plan was to pass over the leadership of the party and ultimately the leadership of government to your son. And it appeared for once you understood that while the party faithful were prepared to stay with you as you age, they were not prepared to allow you to hand over governance to your son. So even within your own party, there are limitations to your control. Because somehow you now have an understanding that the party faithful, while they accept you and will continue with you, they're not prepared necessarily to accept your son being imposed on them. They don't believe that he could win anybody else in a head-to-head combat for leadership of the ULP at this juncture. No, 5 years ago. No, 10 years ago. So if Vincentians listen to what you're saying at the international level, they recognize a pathetic disconnect between what you say at CELAC, beautifully delivered, albeit a bit repetitive, and what you say at CARICOM, and what you say and do at home. Under your leadership, it does not appear possible for St. Vincent and the Grenadines to heal. To heal. But in an election year, you recognize the chips are low. So this year we make a big thing about National Heroes Day. And you give us the history of Châteauguay, a history lesson about Châteauguay. Perhaps the longest speech you have given on Châteauguay in the hot sun on March 14th. And all of your offerings, because now you need the support of the Garifuna peoples more than ever. And so what is the palliative? We're going to take Baliso. We're going to make it some sort of shrine. René Batiste said that donkey years ago. And when René Batiste was talking about making Baliso a shrine to the history and legacy of the Garifuna peoples, where were you? Where was the leadership that was to capitalize on that. Where was it? And that is recent history. At the time, there was no talk of buying the place or taking the place. But now with all the pomp and pageantry in 2025, an election year, we are talking about we could use the law. This is our land. This is the land of our forefathers and blah, 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 blah. Now, and now you so love the Garifuna people that while you're in Honduras, for the meeting of CELAC, you found time to tell our people back home that you're going to commiserate with the Garifuna peoples in Honduras. But those are the same Garifuna peoples in Honduras, in the USA and wherever else, who when Anna Musa said should be given some form of citizenship status, you as Prime Minister berated Eustace, berated the New Democratic Party in opposition, and warned Vincentians that what they were seeking to do was to bring home people who would eventually take your land, take your jobs, take your houses, etc. Do you remember that? Do you, dear listeners, remember that? Because it was not his idea. And now suddenly in 2025, he loved Garifuna more than anybody else in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The same way we talk about him being a blackest man to run this country. Because he wants to think of black now as a concept rather than a color. So if we cannot forget our history, and so rightly, you were telling us about the history of Châteauguay and its importance to Vincentian society and the Vincentian development strategy. But you didn't remember that a few years ago when the opposition people, in trying to build bridges with our Garifuna people, were talking about allowing them to be part of our development strategy going forward. Now suddenly, you forget what you had said then. Or is it that you didn't forget? But now you want to reclaim it, to claim it as your idea? Now you want to claim it? After 24 years in office, you now realize the importance of Baliso to this country's history. After 24 years in office, when ideas about what we could have done with that came from within the bowels of your own party and government through Rene Baptiste years ago, and you ignored it. But now it's appropriate because the chips are down. The charisma has waned. And you and your party appear to be in serious political trauma. So now we're clutching at straws. Anything will do. Because we have to convince the people of this country that we can do much more if we unite. You know, you seize the opportunity while you're in Honduras to tell Vincentians, I'm going to meet the Garifuna. Because they're so important in this election year. Aren't they? Aren't they? Because people at home recognize that for the last 24 years, under your leadership, this country has become ever more politically tribalistic. That is what has happened. Vincentians are frustrated with their perception of how this country has become divided. If our own Vincentian, Adrian Saunders, had achieved the position of Chief Justice of the Caribbean Court of Justice, a Vincentian has made that achievement. And we should have been proud. But we still haven't given the Caribbean Court of Justice jurisdiction to be our final court of appeal. So much for Caribbean unity. But that is consistent, you know. Because under ULP's leadership, the Gonzales has kept St. Vincent and the Grenadines under the Privy Council. And so J. Mitchell was glad because the Privy Council vindicated it. And in short order, they did in a few minutes what several courts in this Eastern Caribbean couldn't do in years. And once he was vindicated, Vincentians heard nothing more about the Otley Hall inquiry. And you have never seen the full disclosure in terms of what that wasteful exercise cost Vincentians. So much for national unity. So under your leadership, we've not gone anywhere closer to acknowledging the Caribbean Court of Justice, headed by a Vincentian, as our final court of appeal. And Justice Saunders, who was himself a political leader at one point in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, comes home for a visit and is able to say publicly, I have to be careful. I have to be careful of how I behave when I come home in terms of the color of the clothes I wear. A reference to the level of political division in our country. Chief Justice for the Caribbean Court of Justice having to tell us that. Sad, isn't it? But his comments seem not to have had any impact, because he made that statement several years ago and the political divisiveness has grown exponentially since then. We're being told that we could have done this and we could have done that and we could have done the other if we had approved the proposed new constitution. But as a quote-unquote scholar of sorts, the Prime Minister knows fully well that he could have led by example. He could have facilitated Together Now, but he hasn't. He could have facilitated a diminution in the powers of the Prime Minister, making governance in this country less prime ministerially dominant. He hasn't. He could have initiated the integrity legislation that he boasted about in his manifesto, his party's manifesto of 2001, but he hasn't. Remember, now taking credit and boasting about civil servants' engagement in national politics, running for office. Now in 2025, when his political fortunes are rock bottom, he is lauding that, we passed this legislation So that public servants could this and public servants could that. When I'm to the first set of public servants, Johnson and others. Remember, he was talking about this while in opposition. And the public sector unions thought that he was serious. And they even put it in their bargaining. And they thought that their agreement had it included. And they've been arguing that for a long time. And what was the Prime Minister's response? Oh, at that time, it was aspirational. It was not intended for implementation. So you did not think it necessary. You put it as an aspiration back then, having discussed it years before while you were in opposition. Just like integrity legislation. So putting it in your manifesto that you will implement in integrity legislation once elected, was that aspirational too? You see, there are these political games that our leaders in the region play. There's an assumption that politics is something only politicians know about. And so they can bamboozle you, all of the thing, under the rubric of elections. As if you've lost your thinking capability. But if by chance you happen to be critical of any public policy initiative or any failure thereof, and you make that public, then you become public enemy number one. You're not supposed to point out things that going awry. But some things are so glaring. And so the Garifuna must be laughing now and saying to themselves, well, look here. We live to see the day when what Adam Eustace was talking about as an option for us years ago, finally, the leadership that rejected it back then is still in office and is now utilizing it for his benefit so that he can gain another term in office. The Garifuna are not stupid. And so he goes and speaks now of something that he knows that they value, which is the historic legacy that Baliso would have forever in this country. But what happened when Eustace was talking about it and citizenship and so on back then? Now we talking the same thing and we put a spin on it. Suddenly years later, a decade later, we are now seeking to implement something that was so easy to implement a decade ago, or however long ago it was. So talk is cheap. And in certain fora, it sounds nice. And you wonder sometimes when the Prime Minister speaks at the United Nations, somehow everybody is supposed to listen to it. But just in case you listen to it, there's a tendency for the document to be sent to the major media outlets. And so you see the whole speech in print. But if you take the time to read some of those documents, you'll realize there's a certain amount of regurgitation of ideas in them. But you also recognize that his contributions to the global environment, the international community, at the General Assembly are not necessarily things that have been raised at home or reflect what we are doing at home. So there is a sense in which at the international level it's necessary to make certain types of statements, even though the concepts behind them, basic concepts, are not necessarily implemented at home. So we sound good to the international community, like we did in CELAC recently. We're sounding good about the importance of us working together as Caribbean and Latin American peoples. But you find yourself between a rock and a hard place when you're trying to bridge the conflict between Guyana and Venezuela. Because Guyana is a member of CARICOM, founding member. Venezuela bail you out with PetroCarib and you join them in ALBA. You have one foot in either camp. And so if you listen to the politics being played, you realize they're still trying to be in both camps. Because you want friends on both sides. But charity begins at home. You have to be careful how you treat your own people if you're going to be talking at a regional and international level about building bridges and establishing solidarity amongst peoples and unity as an ultimate objective. You cannot operate and govern a country by consistently allowing for division. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, what exactly are we doing? Were we not going to have elections now? Were we not to have elections now, would we have had the kind of seeming generosity with regard to people who stood up on principle about vaccination? You're very well aware that people's position on vaccination had nothing to do with their politics. It had to do with their own beliefs, their own choices. And so we are challenging their right to have made those choices. And at the end of the day, we have left the society even further divided. And there's a certain fear that those of your party's political persuasion who ended up being told that they walked off their jobs and who watch your trek to first challenge, appeal the first decision, that they are in sync with those who says we're going to the Privy Council. And you're perhaps hoping, A, that the Privy Council's decision comes out in your favor, and B, that it is not heard before elections. All of that you must be thinking as a politician. But importantly, you want to build enough bridges that those of your party supporters who did not take the vaccine and who were treated the way the others were, whether or not they will come out to vote for you or they will stay home. You're bothered about it. And that's why we've spoken about Lords of Disasters. Because Hurricane Beryl's destruction of Union Island, God forbid, may well be used and seen as an opportunity for the ruling regime to boast about quote-unquote building back better in the hope that you can transform suddenly the political persuasion of decades. You understand the political socialization of peoples of the Grenadines. And they will not forget the imposition of what we called the Grenadines tax. And your forced removal. You had to remove it. You were forced to remove it. But they will remember it because it reflected for them a lack of consideration that they were already paying high prices. And in many instances, higher prices for transportation than the people on the mainland. So now, dear friends, on the eve of elections, we see the frustration of the comrade and his leadership. And so the hope of building a political base in the Grenadines is as far removed from reality as it has ever been. And the offer that they could vote elsewhere, they're not concerned about that. They're going back down to vote. Because they want to send you a very clear message that they are not for sale. It is your responsibility as a government to facilitate rehabilitation of your country or any part thereof. That is your responsibility. The manager told you that when you carried him to see the bridge over troubled water. That is the responsibility of government. Just as it is the responsibility of government for the last 4 years, having the people, the students of the Girls High School, which has the largest functioning alumni in this country. They have to contend with the fact that for the last several years they have been subjected to schooling on the tarmac, having to contend with closures necessitated by an abundance of fleas. That students have been bitten, a teacher bitten, a parent bitten by stray dogs. Stray dogs we couldn't control out of school. Stray dogs. That's how much we have taken care of our population. But if you talk about it, people get upset because you're supposed to wait until they talk about it. Thomas Sanders, ditto. It is a level of disrespect for the students, their parents, the teachers of those two institutions. And so we are trying to build other things. And we're not telling from Saunders students and parents and teachers if and when they will be moved from the tarmac, because no work has started on their building. We're seeking to build everything else because there seems to be a belief that in truth and in fact, voters are swayed by fanciful buildings, nicely painted, so that they can become the showpiece of governance. The building is a showpiece of governance. And so, in some of the articles being written on behalf of the Unity Labour Party in the newspapers on weekend, continue to amaze, because you're wondering, are they telling us really that we're supposed to be grateful for all the things that they have done for us? That they have done for us? That's what they're saying, you know. We have done this for you, so vote us back because we have been doing so many good things for you. But we have short memories? Is it that the politicians believe people have short memories? Tell the people of North Leeward what you have done for them by taking away lands that they were using meaningfully to eke out a living and giving it to Reno to do quarrying. And so we're protecting Reno because Reno is somehow doing some good for Vincentians. Well, you need to tell Vincentians how Reno doing good. Same way you need to tell Vincentians what is the ratio of Vincentians to non-Vincentians at the leadership level, supervisory level at Sandals. Tell us. Tell us the details of the deals that this government has made with Sandals. Let us have a discussion on how certain people can get contracts to do certain things to benefit from Sandals. Everything is coming out. People are finding out who is getting what sort of transportation arrangements, etc., etc. So that at the end of the day, by the time elections come around, the whole shebang will be known by everybody in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Because a government should have nothing to hide from its people. The whole truth and nothing but the truth is demanded of a government. And that is why there's this concern for integrity legislation. So that people can be aware of how governance is benefiting the nation. Not how governance is benefiting any particular set of individuals. You're a small society. And so, as we prepare for the elections, we have an understanding that it's one thing to say how well we could do as a region, how we can work together to benefit the peoples of this region. It's another thing to not do that in your own home country. Because when people look at your country and that is not what exists, then they realize that it is a contradiction between the reality at home and the theory that is spouted at the international fora. So we have a problem in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The people will ultimately decide as they've always done. But it does not prevent us from calling on the people of the country to systematically analyze the Vincentian reality. How have you benefited? Who have been the major beneficiaries? What kind of solidarity exists among the peoples of St. Vincent and the Grenadines? And how have our people been playing games, whether they be religious leaders who have perhaps unwittingly or not so unwittingly surrendered on the altar of political expediency, just like so many other people? Or people who have to keep singing from that particular song sheet in order to sustain their survival and justify their existence. What has become of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and all of the lessons that we were supposed to take from the Prime Minister's address on March 14th on Châteauguay and the Garifuna peoples? Why haven't we heard that before? Why this year it has become so important? Why could we not have had that kind of speech in the very year that Eustace was talking about the possibility of opening up citizenship of sorts to our Garifuna peoples? Instead of making it a mockery then, and of telling people, what are they coming home to do? They coming for your house? Are they coming for your house? Are they coming for your jobs? These are our people that we're embracing now, eh? Now, nothing has changed other than the fact that the ruling regime is scraping the bottom of the barrel. Nothing has changed. You're able to say now how much we love Garifuna. And we show you how much we love you because we have taken hold of what could become a shrine to your struggles when you're exiled on Baliso before being taken to Roatan. Now we find it important to go where they live, in Honduras. And before election, we probably find it necessary to go to them in Guatemala as well as in Belize, in Danriga. No, because they are scraping the bottom of the barrel. Elections coming. So Eustace's offer was treated disparagingly several years ago. But now the same thing has come back. But it's coming back now repackaged as a Unity Labour Party display of love for Garifuna. And so we're doing all kind of things for Garifuna in 2025 because it's elections. How will the Garifuna react? Will they not see through the political charlatanism? Or will they be sucked in? We find ourselves at the crossroads of history in 2025. Take note of how the Unity Labour Party and its leadership are courting you and telling you what they have done for you. But you live in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and you need to analyze who have been the beneficiaries of the largesse dispensed by the Unity Labour Party government. How has the government operated over the last several years? Who have been the beneficiaries? And that is the challenge that we all have. We continue to make good sounding speeches at CELAC, the United Nations, OECS, and what have you. But at the end of the day, together now is but a hollow phrase. Its value spent because it was never taken seriously. People ask themselves, was it ever intended to be taken seriously? What have we understood about that together now? So we look and we listen and we have an understanding, because even now we are unclear as to how we are responding to the challenges imposed upon us by that 10% tariff. The President of the United States boasted that it is working. You have to have a little medicine sometimes when you want to get well. But it will pass. The pain will pass. We are gathering together to join the long line that the President of the United States says is forming of people anxious to come to negotiate tariffs with them. He boasts of that. And he also made some disparaging remarks about why they're lining up to do what and to do what. But you wonder sometimes, how do we arrive at when we will take what type of pain? Because the Vincentian government's response has been to tell us what they are doing for us without discussing it with us. We put up a task force but where are the consultations with the average Vincentian to explain what the tariffs would mean and to get their input as to how we should respond? Governance is not just about slapdash telling people what you're doing for them. Because at the end of the day, unless there is consultation with the masses, you are making an assumption that you know their needs. You're assuming that they don't know their needs and that you can articulate it for them because of what you perceive their needs to be. And that is why we keep harping back to the refusal to make public the Poverty Assessment Report of 2018. Because that was intended to gather information as to how well we are doing with regard to alleviating poverty in this country. Because for years, we've been told since 2001, the major inroads we are making into redressing poverty and indigence in the country. Where are the yardsticks? So you make an assessment report that is kept hidden from the public. We don't want you to know what information was gathered. But they have determined that they don't like the results and blaming the methodology. What has changed about the methodology over the years? So people have to be hearing in little pieces some information about what was actually in the report. Who wrote the report? The masses in the street weren't the ones to write the report. And the report would have taken on board the responses that were given by the Vincentian public. But without coming back to the Vincentian public, you decide as a government, we don't like how this study was conducted. And so we're not going to give you the results. That is tantamount to saying we don't trust you as a Vincentian public to make sense out of nonsense. But there's that assumption that you don't know what you're doing, so we can't trust you with the report. But yet we're going and telling people about regional unity and what we can achieve as a region. And we're invoking God and bringing them into that. Are we doing the same at home? It makes no sense telling the international community all that we could and should do if you seem unwilling to do the same at home first to benefit your own people. That is the reality. And that is what we are dealing with. And all around St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you're getting rallies, meetings, house-to-house visits, and all the rest by politicians and would-be politicians. And at the end of the day, people say you get the government you deserve because you vote to put them there. And everybody tries to find a reason to justify the way they have voted. Why they vote this way, why they vote that way. The choice is an individual one, and it has to be respected. And there's no need for recrimination if you don't win. What is important is that you respect the will of the people. What you want to do is ensure that there are no political shenanigans taking place. That is why parties have to be vigilant. The official processes of registration, of production of voters' lists, etc., are critical to facilitating genuine democracy. The will of the people is what comes out at the end of an election. We should say is what is supposed to emerge at the end of elections. Everybody has to be vigilant. But as the people of a nation, what you want is to ensure that the issues are brought to the fore. That when people come to you to ask for your vote, that it is not about how much money you could get from them. Never allow your vote to be bought and paid for. Stand on principle. Stand on your own integrity and demand the integrity of those who come to your homes to ask for your vote. Do not be afraid to challenge them. Ask them all of the questions, all of the issues that you consider sufficiently important to you so that you can register a vote based on your analysis of the realities and as your conscience dictates. Think long and hard of what progress or lack thereof and in which areas we have witnessed over the last several years. Are we a more just society? Are we a fair society? Are we a society in which we can see a movement towards equality, social equality, economic equality? Or are we at a stage where you can tell who is going where as a result of what? Never be afraid to ask the right questions. Never be afraid to stand up to the challenges that you need to make in order to facilitate changes in our society. We look and we see in the media what is taking place. Although on some media, it is all about the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister check the number of stories on any given day that highlight the Prime Minister and compare it with the number of times you hear on the daily news about other ministers of government. And ask yourself, is this a government of and for the people? Or is it something else? To what extent are we genuinely presenting what is in the best interest of the country? So now our response is that we are turning here and we are turning there and we are turning there. There has not been a cohesive response to the tariffs by our government. We are helter-skelter. There's not a unified position that this country has given. And in this regard, there's no leadership. Everybody seems to be talking something else. But importantly, they've taken the right away from you to tell you that they are doing something. They are preparing something for you so that they can present it on your behalf. But they don't necessarily need to talk to you. And the reason that they are anxious and comfortable with that approach is because that is the approach they have always used. You, the public, are only important when it comes to casting your vote. Between elections, it's we doing it for and on behalf of the people. While you, the people, choose to stay silent about what they claim is being done on your behalf, it allows them to feel a sense of self-righteousness that they have been doing this for you, and you see it in their articles. It is what we have done for you, right? Because we are in control of the government. We are in control of the public purse. So we determine when we will fix which road, where, and why. We also determine how we will fix it. And we recognize that across the country, the same holes open up over time, over and over and over again. So there must be something wrong with it, with the way you've done it. But what is interesting is the pace with which the work is being done now. And it begs the question, is this what happens at election time to win my vote? That I am only important and my well-being is only important every 5 years, once every 5 years. After that, Leave me to do my own thing. This is where we are today. And we have to acknowledge that we have not had any sort of genuine leadership in respect of what is happening internationally as a result of the tariffs that are coming one way to another. Don't allow us to fall prey to the statement made by the Prime Minister on the 30th of March while celebrating 34 years in office. That they have done so well over the last 24 years that the party should not be campaigning for a sixth term. It shouldn't campaign. Note, quote, we really should not be campaigning given what we have done for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And then he adds, and what we have done together. Right? But who has done it together? Not the country. It has not been the country. It has been the party. He could have stopped at we really should not be campaigning given what we have done for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You should have stopped right there. Because the business and what we have done together suggests that the together now has actually been applicable across the country. That is not the case. And all of us know that that is not the case. But again, sloganeering. Just as he's speaking at CELAC, at the United Nations, OECS, just as he speaks glibly, giving the impression we've done so much together, and at home, there is anything but togetherness. Enough said. You'll be listening to another edition of Nice Radio's Callaloo presentation, Just Another Look. Just Another Look is an innovative, exciting, albeit decidedly provocative and yes, certainly controversial, socio-political analysis of issues of a local, regional, and international nature. Just Another Look is heard on Nice Radio on Saturdays at 6 p.m., repeated on Sundays at 9 p.m. We ask you to remember that you can find us on the World Wide Web, www.niceradio.info. But you could also find us on Facebook and YouTube. I am, of course, Keith Joseph.